All right, let's talk about switch statements. So, switch statements are really useful if you have a bunch of conditions that compare against static values. Okay. So, for example, let's pretend that we have a grading system where if you have 90 to 100 means an A, and if you have between 80 and 89 is a B. And if you have between 70 and 79 is a C. And if you have between 60 and 69, it's a D. And if you have anything else, it's an F. Okay, so let's work on those assumptions. First, let's create a variable called grade, and we're going to put our test score in there. Let's pretend that we got an 89. Okay. Now, since we know how to use if statements, we could write this all out using if statements. So we could say if grade is less than 90, then you got a B. Okay. And then we could say, well, it has to be less than 90, but it also has to be greater than 79 because it has to be between 80 and 89. And so grade has to be less than 90 and it has to be greater than 79 to get a B. So we could write a bunch of statements like that. Or instead of doing that, we could use a switch statement. Now, in order to do the switch statement, we have to notice something about this. First of all, notice the pattern here of our grading scale. Our grading scale basically says if I'm in the 60s, I have a D. If I'm in the 70s, I have a C. If I'm in the 80s, I have a B. If I'm in the 90s or hundreds, I have an A. So we're going to take advantage of a little trick to get just the tens place. So the tens place value, and we can get this by taking our grade and let's pretend that we divide it by 10 for a second. I just want to show you what that looks like. So if we run this code, and let me move this window over here like we do. So if we run this code, our grade is 89. And if we step over this, the tens place is now an 8. Okay, so 89 divided by 10 is 8. Why is that? Why is it not 8.9? Well, we talked about how when you divide by an integer, it truncates or cuts off the decimal, right? So let's change our grade to a 76 and run that again. So when I step over that, my tens place is a 7 because 76 divided by 10 is 7.6. We drop the decimal. We don't round. We drop the decimal, which changes it to a 7. And so we can get the tens place fairly easily. Taking advantage of that, we can write our switch statement. And the way this works is we are going to tell the switch statement which value to pay attention to, or rather, which variable to pay attention to. And in this case, we want it to make decisions based on the value in the tens place variable. And what we'll do is we'll create cases for each situation and have it output a different result depending on that value. So the first case we want to handle is let's go ahead and start with the A's, and we'll say that if the value of tens place is a 9, that means it's between 90 and 99, and we'll handle hundreds here at the end. We want it to output, you got an A. And as the book talks about, we have to have a break statement after that. And then let's handle cases in the 80s. So if you have between an 80 and an 89, you got a B. And let's handle 70s. You got a C. And oops. Now we are missing, and it's warning me about this. You can see why these are highlighted under or underlined in that squiggly red line. It's because we cannot allow our case statement to fall through to the next one in C#. So we have to make sure we put a break statement after each case to tell it to stop executing. And then we have our 60s, you got a D. Okay, so let's run this the way it is right now. And just to make sure we can see the output clearly and we know what's happening, before we look at that, let's have it output a header grade report. And at the end, we'll have it output just this ending statement. And we'll just draw some lines there. All right, so let's run this. And right now our grade is set to 76. And we see that the result, as we expect, we got a C because in our grading scale between 70 and 79 is a C. Now let's step through this code. We will put a breakpoint here at the beginning of our switch statement and run that. And you can see our tens place is set to a 7 because we divided grade by 10 using integer division. So we drop the decimal. And then we step over that. And when we step over that, you'll see that we jump right to the place where our case label matches the value in the variable of our switch statement. So we're saying inspect this, look at this value, and jump to the case that matches. And the case that matches is here. And so we're going to execute all of the lines inside of that case statement. So right now we only have one in each one, but we could have as many lines of coding that we wanted there, as many different statements as we want. So we execute that line, and then when we hit the break statement, it jumps out of the switch, skips the rest of it, and goes to the end. And you can see that over here when we execute that line. That's the final statement. Now, if we change this to a 86 and run that, we'll stop here as our breakpoint again. And now our tens place is an 8. And so you'll see that we jump into case number 8. We're going to execute that code, print you got a B, skip the rest of the switch statement when we hit the break, and then print out this part. Now, one thing I want to note here, we have cases for 9, 8, 7, and 6. What happens if we get a 56? Well, we run this. We see tens place is set to 5. That's the result of our integer division. But there are no matching case statements, and so we just jump right here to the end. So we want, if we get a 50 or a 40 or 30 or 20 or 10 or less, we want to always print you have an F. So what we can do is we can say that if none of the cases match, we have a default case. This default case will be executed whenever none of the other cases match. And we'll say you got an F. Okay. And once again, we have to add our break. So now when we execute this, our tens place is a 5. It does not match any of the explicit cases. And so we'll go to the default case. You got an F. And that'll print. And that'll work no matter what other value we put here. So we'll run this with 36. We can see we jump again to the default. Now, we've got one problem, though. Let's say we got a perfect score, 100. When we run this, first of all, our tens place value is a 10, because if we divide 100 by 10, we get 10. Well, the problem here is that 10 does not match any of our existing cases. And so what will happen is we will jump to the default. And so even though our score was 100, our grading system says we got an F, which isn't right. So what we want is to print that we got an A. So there are two ways we could do this. One, we could add a case for 10, like this. And add another break. Okay. But since both of these cases are identical, what we do for case 10 and case 9, instead, we can just delete that and we can say if we are in case 10 or we're in case 9, execute this code. So now when we run this program, we match this case group because we have case 10 And so we execute that code, then we hit the break statement, and we jump out of the switch and to the end. So that is the way to use a switch statement. Once again, you put a variable here that you want to inspect, that you want to use to make the decision. You have case labels that match possible values. Every case label can have one or more statements within it. We have to end with a break statement to say that this is the end of that case. We can have a catch-all case at the end labeled default, which will execute if none of the other cases match. And if we want multiple values to correspond to the same case, we can just chain them together like that. If you have any questions, send me an email or ask on Slack.